Hello, I'm Gus Downing, publisher and editor of the D&D Daily, and this is the LP News Network. With us today is Richard Hollinger, PhD, professor, Department of Sociology and Criminology and Law, University of Florida. Richard is the director of the Security Research Project that focuses exclusively on retail loss prevention and security issues. Dr. Hollinger conducts the National Retail Security Survey, which the retail industry uses to benchmark national shrinkage. His major focus has been on white-collar crime, but as organized retail crime is now affecting the industry, he's added this component to the survey over the past few years. Dr. Hollinger serves on the NRSS Loss Prevention Advisory Council, and today's session is entitled New Perspectives of the National Retail Security Survey. In the NRF's Protect written description of this session that was given here today, Dr. Hollinger presented, it says, the University of Florida and the NRF have partnered for over a decade to conduct the National Retail Security Survey study. This industry standard study covers retail loss prevention and security issues across many areas, including inventory shrinkage, employee integrity screening, awareness programs, and external retail crime, among other loss prevention topics. Hear the latest developments and how the research is conducted, and get insights from our most recent gathering of critically important data on loss prevention in the retail industry. And with that, I'd like to thank Richard for taking the time to sit down with us today. Thanks, Richard.
Thanks, Gus. Good to be here.
You know, in your study, you talk about some key basic metrics in loss prevention, and that's what really you're measuring in asset protection as well. Could you explain to us what those are and how you collect that information and give us a feel for it?
Well, we first started doing this study back in 1991, so we've been collecting these data for some time now. The first question, obviously, is how much loss is there? How much shrinkage is occurring? When we first started doing this study, there really wasn't a baseline. The Uniform Crime Reports gives us a good sense of how much crime is occurring in society based on arrest rates, but the retail community really didn't know what its losses were. So we started collecting information basically about shrinkage rates, which is, as many of your viewers know, is the amount of loss that occurs that can't be accounted for at the end of the inventory period. And each year we've noticed that those two big pieces of that pie are shoplifting and employee theft. This year, however, for the first time in the history of the study, we've actually seen the percentage or the piece of the pie for shoplifting actually get larger than the employee theft number. It's been an embarrassment actually for many people in retail who've wondered why it is that the biggest piece of the pie was internal theft. Why, as Gerald Greenberg, one of my colleagues at Ohio State, says, why do they bite the hand that feeds them? And it's an interesting question. You know, why do employees who we've hired, trained, work alongside of us, why do they steal from the organization? So this year we've seen a little bit of a switch. And it's probably due to the ORC, the organized retail crime. It's beginning to have a greater impact on the total shrinkage picture.
So ORC is growing to that extent based on the numbers that you're seeing?
Well, that's my interpretation. Unfortunately, there's not a real good audit trail. The viewers of this show should probably already know that when merchandise is missing from the shelf, there's not a good audit trail to know where it went.
Right.
Did it go out the front door? Did it go out the back door? Did it go out with vendors? Or did we just lose it in the computer somewhere because we've marked it up or marked it down wrong? But for the most part, the two largest shares of the pie have been internal theft, external theft, and we've always worried that having the ORC number in there because it's getting larger, we think it's getting larger and larger, might distort the picture. But this year, we've actually seen, of the total shrinkage rate, which was 1.38%, a larger share of shoplifting than employee theft.
That's significant.
It is significant, and it surprised me. When I look at the results, a lot of people say, well, you've done it for 24 years, what surprises you? And this was a surprise.
How many retailers are involved in putting together the information?
Well, we have 100 retailers, and they're some of the very, very largest retailers in the country. It's an anonymous study. It's done confidentially. Most retailers couldn't or wouldn't participate if we identified them.
Obviously.
So that's obvious. But we have 100 respondents. Not every question is answered, unfortunately, but most are. And so the core that we've used for the last probably 10 years has been the top 100 retailers.
What are some of the other numbers, some of the other trends that you're seeing from this particular study?
Well, I think we're beginning to see more and more data analytics. One of the questions we ask is, how much, what are you doing to fight the problem of inventory loss? And there are a number of questions that involve technology. And when we first introduced them, they were just on the cutting edge. Now we're starting to see more and more of use of interaction between the IP connection and POS systems, data mining.
It's becoming mainstream.
Data analytic.
As opposed to the exception.
Exactly. I think given the constraints on budgets and not having to hire more people or not being allowed to hire more staff, which is a fixed cost and a fairly large fixed cost, more and more retailers are choosing to use technology to the extent that it's possible to fight the problem.
Now, you say that the external number has increased and you believe it is ORC. Did you differentiate that in the study and specifically ask the retailers, shoplifting is shoplifting, ORC is ORC. Did you have them drill that number down?
Well,
and that's somewhat subjective to a certain extent.
Well, yeah, you've really got a mouthful of questions there.
Yes.
So let me take them one by one. No, we really can't break the ORC from the shoplifting.
Okay.
I mean, and in fact, to your other point, this is the softest number, or I guess the number that I worry about the most, because it is not supported by a very good audit trail. As people in retail will know, when merchandise is gone, the big question is, where did it go?
Right.
And unless you have an audit trail, you really can't tell. And so what we've done over the years is said, well, if we can't trace it, we don't have a good picture, we don't have video of it being stolen, we don't know exactly where it's gone. What we've done is ask vice presidents of loss prevention, who should be the people best knowledgeable about this question, where do they believe that it's going? So it's a somewhat softer number, but we've asked the question in the same way for the last 20 some years. And so I feel these are the best experts that we have. And
that's the way they're answering the question.
And that's why I think they're answering the question in the way they are, because I think they believe that the ORC issue is hurting them more than ever before.
So we have an increase in data analytics. We have an increase in the ORC. I mean, we're seeing the impact of technology in retail, from good and bad, and the ugly, so to speak.
Exactly, and this, we've seen the leveraging of technology in other parts of our society. We all have smartphones. We all have the technology that sometimes rules our lives, but makes it easier in many ways. Retailers, I think, are taking advantage of some of these new technologies.
So are the thieves.
And unfortunately, so are the thieves. They take their cameras into the stores. They do sophisticated intelligence gathering before they actually hit the store.
They sell it online.
And they know exactly what they're going for. They know what sells, what won't sell. They know where they're going to sell it, and they know what price point to put it. Yes, in many ways, the thieves are as sophisticated in some ways as retailers.
Are you considering including anything about cybersecurity, about data breaches, about any of that criminal activity in the retail environment that's not necessarily put in a National Retail Security Survey? I mean, that's kind of over here. Is it really hasn't been over here yet. I mean, especially from your academic perspective.
I would love to. I've written a book actually on computer crime, but it wasn't related to retail computer crime. It was mainly due to related to hacking.
Right.
And so early in my career, I've always been interested in hackers and crackers. The crackers are the more malicious of the hacking population, but now we're beginning to see many of these the hackers hit retail stores. Sure. And hit them badly. The real question is finding a retail store that hasn't been hacked or doesn't know that it's been hacked yet. It's becoming so common almost that
well, the nexus with credit card fraud is incredible.
It is, and I started first doing some research on that. We saw many of these credit card breaches occur, but there's also other sophisticated technologies. There's skimmers, for example, right. Which we knew about for years that were used in restaurants. Now they're being used on gasoline station pumps. Right. So every time.
Are those numbers included in the survey?
No, they're not included at all. So if I had all the time in the world, Gus, yes, I would like to include these kinds of questions. They're fascinating. And this whole world of the hacker community and where this merchandise ends up, how it's sold, how the internet is used for the marketing of this merchandise, really, really good material.
Is there any other trend, outside of the big mainstream ORC is increasing? Are there any other trends below that the senior LP leader or even the DLPM needs to know about, needs to hear, needs to be sensitive to?
Well, one of the nice things that we saw in this year's survey was an increase for the first year in a number of years of budgets in loss prevention. Now, we're not talking about
that in the retail industry. There's been an increase in the budget.
We ask it this way: what percentage of your increase, what percentage of your revenues to the department? Right. And we express it in terms of sales. And so it's not substantial, and we're talking about 0.34, 0.38 of sales.
It's significant given the economy.
But for many, many years, I used to come to these meetings, and the mantra used to be, do more with less.
Absolutely.
We have a huge problem. Unfortunately, the company's not making a lot of money right now, so the loss prevention budget is going to have to decrease.
Right.
So fight the problem, but we don't have the money to do so. For the first time in many years, we've actually seen at least loss prevention executives report that their budgets are on the increase rather than at least flat or on the increase, not on the decrease.
But is that a result of theft, or is that a result of workplace violence, active shooting, and terrorism, and all the other negative factors?
Well, these are decisions made at the C level.
Right.
So my guess is that those kinds of tragic events, as sad as they are, if there's any silver lining, it's actually awakening the C-level and other individuals who are making monetary decisions that this is really something that we need to be dealt with. Right. And so, that's America. We only fight problems once they get to a crisis level. And unfortunately, a shooting in a store can have a tragic effect not only on the victims, but on the store and the sales and on the company itself. And so we've seen it in shopping centers, we've seen it in retail chains across the country and across the world.
I wonder, though, do you break down that increase in budget from a standpoint of capital versus payroll?
We do.
Where is the increase?
Well, the increase seems to be coming in capital, which is...
That makes sense, technology.
Which makes sense. That's why I talked about the leveraging of technology.
Not payroll.
Payroll is a fixed cost.
Right.
There's associated problems, with it, not the least of which are fringe benefits and healthcare and other kinds of problems. And so now we're starting to see non-people solutions to some of these technological problems.
Right. You know, Richard, after doing this for 20 years, God bless you for doing it. I mean, it's a
Thank you.
fantastic benefit to the to the industry, to the executives, and to the retailers and the C-level folks, because they need to see this data. But after doing it 20 years, what message do you have to the retailer? Do you have one you want to send?
Well, I think my hope is that we will continue to move forward and not be afraid. My fear was that when ORC came on the scene, that a lot of retailers would say, well, let's give up. These groups are more sophisticated. We don't have any way of fighting them. And so my message is, let's continue to fight the good battle. Mm-hmm. And I think there are answers. I've seen many silver bullets posed over the years, and some of them have really not paid off very well. But hopefully there are some, and I think using technology, leveraging the type of technology, particularly with new things, face identification software. Right. I think retailing, for example, has been afraid to use it. Well, in the gambling industry, in casinos, it's being used extensively. The State Department uses it to screen passengers in and off of airplanes. But retailers, unfortunately, I think, are a little afraid to use it for fear that it might have a public relations effect.
Well, there's also some privacy issues.
There's privacy issues.
The feds are currently reviewing the list they're releasing next year, hopefully, for the guidelines of usage and the collection of data and how long they'll store it. I mean, they're currently really looking at that.
That's true, but the feds have are always concerned about this, I guess, the dilemma of criminal justice in society, of how do we create a democracy but give you crime control at the same time.
And how do you control it from a federal level when the states want the control over a lot of those privacy issues? I mean, it kind of goes in the same bucket as cybersecurity, and it's a slippery slope. Once you start with one, you're going to have to consider all of those privacy issues.
The libertarian, the privacy issues. However, it wouldn't surprise me in the least to see at least some discussion among retailers of putting cameras on retail salespersons or retail loss prevention personnel, in the same way as we're discussing this in the use of police officers. And I could see making that argument for customer service, and I could see it having a positive benefit for loss prevention as well. Sure. Because we really don't have a very good understanding of what happens between the transaction, between the customer and the salesperson.
Have you published any of that anywhere?
No.
It's the first time I've heard it anywhere.
Yeah, well, I heard it the other day when I was talking to some of the arts people who are a community within the National Retail Federation. And one of the technology people said, you know, have you guys ever thought about putting cameras on salespersons or on loss prevention persons? And I kind of shuddered for a moment because I thought of, you know, some of these privacy issues. On the other hand, you know, my mind started to click and I thought, well, if we can get around those issues, it might be a tremendous benefit.
It'd be kind of hard to put it on a store detective, you know, trying to walk around the store and.
It would.
Here,
but
I got a camera.
But one of the problems we've always had with identifying shoplifters is getting a good facial frontal view picture of them.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I could see a loss prevention person who confronts a known shoplifter might be able to get a good picture, a good frontal view picture that would work and help identify that individual using facial identification software.
Well, Richard, thank you for taking the time today. I appreciate it.
Thanks for inviting me to join you, Gus.
Well, that's it for this episode, and we would like to thank you for watching. And until next time, let's keep them all safe out there.